I think we're starting now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Women's Studies. My name is Nithika, and I'm the Women's Health Intern at Women's Studies. Woo! If you don't know the person you're sitting next to, take a quick moment to say hello.
Hi.
Okay. We want to begin by recognizing that we are on occupied land. This is Haudenosaunee land. And I just have a few announcements. Please follow us on Instagram, and our handle is at Colgate WMST, so WIM. And also, please send us a book recommendation for that bulletin board with like a few lines if you'd like as to why you think people should read it. It could be any sort of book, it doesn't have to be academic. And you can sign up for the WMST outreach on the clipboard. This is the clipboard. You can sign up for this. I can pass it around. Yes. Oh, I think we need a pen. Sorry. And tonight at 8 p.m. in Haven, which is located in Curtis Basement, there will be a speak out for survivors of relationship violence and sexual violence, hosted by the network. And Thursday at 4:30 p.m. in Golden Auditorium, Black Lives Matter activist Devore will be speaking, and it's hosted by Brothers. And Thursday at 6 p.m. in WMST, there will be a talk on asexual and bisexual identities, and there will be food. This is part of LGBTQ History Month. Please also take time to write a message on the coming outdoors around campus. And a few other instructions. If you need to leave during the presentation, please do so respectfully, quietly, so as to not disturb the presentation. And please clean up around yourself. And there's compost and trash in the back. And also, if once the brown bag is done, we would love if you could help us put the chairs back. And thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to pass the mic over to Professor Loeb.
All right, hi, welcome. Glad to see you all here despite the snow and weather changes, seasonal changes, and midterms and all of that. I'm so excited to introduce Barbara and Evelyn today. They're friends of mine from Albany. We're continuing with the series of local activists. How many of you saw Barbara Smith when she came last year to talk about activism in our area? Yes, really exciting. So continuing with understanding how people sustain their activism over their lives, and a little bit of background on Evelyn. Evelyn's going to speak first on the left here. Evelyn is the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors and credits her interest in discrimination and inclusion to her family's background. She's been a facilitator for the Anti-Defamation League, a World of Difference Institute, anti-bias and anti-bullying training program since 1993. She's also a facilitator for ADL's Confronting Anti-Semitism throughout New York State, and offers programs in schools and on college campuses, and she'll tell us a little bit about those programs today. And then Barbara Devore, as a woman born with spina bifida, she spent her lifetime in the disability community advocating for equal rights and equal opportunities. She's Director of Development at the Independent Living Center of the Hudson Valley, located in Troy, New York. Have any of you been to Troy, New York? Yay, all right. Great city. This is a consumer-controlled disability organization providing both direct services to individuals to support them as they move towards greater independence, and systems advocacy addressing the inequality that still exists for people with disabilities. So we have 2 people who are doing such important and difficult work and sustaining it over their lifetimes. How do they make it sustainable? Well, maybe one of the answers to that question is that they are part of a thing called the Dance Mob of Albany. And I'm also part of that group. So we see each other every Friday and we dance together. And that's a way to sustain all of this work that we do. You have to have a release, right? We all agree with that. So without further ado, members of the Dance Mob, and maybe we'll even break out and dance at some point. Here's Evelyn.
Thank you. Is this in here? Okay. I want to thank you for inviting us. Barbara and I are very, very excited to be here, to be sharing our stories with such a dynamic and interesting and committed group of young people. We really, really appreciate it. So as Dr. Loeb mentioned, I am the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. And basically the way I see it is that the most important events in my life happened before I was born. My mother was 13 years old when she was forced to go by herself from her home in Vienna, Austria, and travel through Nazi Germany to Amsterdam, Holland, where she was in hiding for 3 years. Just a few blocks from where Anne Frank and her family were hidden. My mother had some very, very difficult times. There was very little food, no medical care. She had many illnesses. And one of the things she talks about as being the most difficult thing for her is the fear of being caught. That almost worse than the cold and the hunger and the sickness, the fear of every moment not being able to go anywhere and lose your identity is basically what happened to her. So it's really, really very difficult. Now, my grandparents, who sent her off by herself when she was 13, had the papers to go with her, but they never made it. And we still don't know why. We really don't. But we do know that, unfortunately, they were murdered at a Nazi death camp called Belsen. And this is a place where you've heard about Auschwitz and other places. It's a place people don't know much about because, unfortunately, nobody survived that place. It was just a death camp. So my grandparents were murdered there, and every time my mother would mention her mother, my grandmother, she would just cry for hours. So it was really, really very sad and difficult for her to remember. My father was also a Holocaust survivor. He grew up in Nazi Germany, and he spent time in Dachau concentration camp, and also had some very difficult times. They had to stand at attention for hours on end. There was nothing for them to do there, and just, to humiliate them. Very little food, of course, and he was very sick. So it was very difficult, and you can imagine that growing up with both parents being Holocaust survivors, some survivors didn't talk about the Holocaust much to their children. They would try and protect them. My parents needed to talk about it all the time, and I'm not faulting them for that. But honestly, one of my first memories is about the Holocaust. And anytime I would ask about grandparents, my mother would just cry for hours. So growing up, I remember just feeling very different from everybody else, even among my Jewish friends, that they couldn't relate. And this was a long time ago. People were not talking about the Holocaust like they do now. And I just felt very different. And I used to have these, like a childhood fantasy that I would go to Europe and I would try, maybe I could find my grandparents somehow, and I would do what I can to find them. I also used to think, gee, what would it be like if I was on a train and I was on my way to Auschwitz? Would I have been able to cope? Would I have been able to survive? So there are studies now that show that people who are second generation, which is what we call ourselves, really had the trauma and the PT and post-traumatic stress disorder passed down to us. We actually have supposedly higher cortisone levels in our brain, which is a stress level, that shows that we also really have PTSD as well from just, even though we didn't live through those experiences, we do have those feelings ourselves. So very, very difficult. My parents were trying to make it. They were immigrants. They had to learn the language and all those things. So it was really in many ways, it was a tough childhood. And so I could have chosen, as a result of that childhood, to think about the world as being negative and be depressed about it, and to think about, my parents had been targets and victims, and family was gone, and it was just a very sad kind of feeling. But I was also lucky in some ways because I also, along with the sad stories that I heard, I also heard about some people who chose to do something during the Holocaust. People who chose to do things to become rescuers and actually do something to help other Jews. And some of them were Jews, but many of them were non-Jews. And there were people like that that actually helped my mother. People like Jocha and Art Voss, who were a Dutch couple who not only risked their own lives, but they risked the lives of their 4 little children. I mean, think about that. Some of you, you think about having children at some point, or if you have children, what would it be like to risk a child's life? Because people were arrested, people were killed, and children were deported because they helped Jews. So this is what the Voss family did. And they lived in this town called Laren, which my mother was in hiding in Amsterdam as well as in Laren. And they lived in a house at the very end of the street that was next to a nature preserve. And Art Voss built a tunnel that was coming from the house, and they used to heat their houses with coal back in those days. And he put a false top on the coal bin, and inside he built a tunnel that went through the house and out into the yard and out to the nature preserve. Now people always say, oh, nobody knew what was happening to the Jews and so on and so forth. That's really not true. Most people did know what was happening, and the truth is that for the buses, they saved not only my mother, but 35 other people. Such a huge number of people. And so when the Dutch police were in on the secret, and they would call the house, and the phone would ring twice. And that was a signal for all of the Jews to get into the coal bin, go through the tunnel, out into the yard, and then to sleep in the nature preserve overnight. Because the Nazis, they knew there were people there. The Dutch police were in on it, the whole town knew, but the Nazis suspected it, but they never found a single person. It was amazing. So the whole town was really basically in on it. And it's an amazing story. And if the buses hadn't done that, and if they hadn't hidden my mother, she would never have survived, and I would never have been born. So I really am living proof that one person's actions really do matter, and that what we do in this world to make a difference is really important. You may not know what it is right this minute, but it really does matter. And that's what I chose to focus on in my life, to really think about not just the victimhood and what happened, all the sorrow of the Holocaust, but what I could do in my life to try to make a difference. And let me just show you a couple of pictures that, pictures are really helpful. This is a picture of my mom when she was 6 years old. I don't know if all of you can see that. And this is her with my grandparents. She was able to keep a few of the photographs from the family, so that's very lucky. And everybody's smiling here because she just took my grandfather's hat off of his head and put it on her head. And you can see that this is a very normal family. Sometimes we focus and when we think about the Holocaust that it was, just the victims, but it was a very normal family, and they had normal lives just like we all do. So they had a very lovely situation in Vienna. And this is the photograph that was taken right before, the night before my mother left on the train. Here she is. She's 13 here. She looks a lot older because I guess the hairstyles were different. My grandparents and my uncle are in this photograph. And they don't look happy in this picture because they know that she's leaving. This is a bit of a grainy photograph, so I'll move on to the next one. This is Jocha and Art Voss. And I don't know if you can see, but this is the tunnel. And these are the children playing, the Voss's children playing in the tunnel. And here's a picture of my mom with Jocha. Art Voss died in 1989, and he wasn't able, my mother met them back in the 80s, and he got awarded and honored by Yad Vashem and all the different Holocaust organizations, which is great for their rescue efforts. But unfortunately, he didn't get to do all the things that Jocha did. She just died about 5 or 6 years ago. She was like 96. And my mother, this is very unusual, my mother spoke with her. To have a survivor speak with a rescuer was pretty unusual. And that happened a number of years ago at St. Rose College. And this is me back then. And that's Art Voss. And this is another one of my mother's rescuers, Nikki Sino. And she went back to Holland to see her. And that's then right before Jocha Voss died. I want to give you the pictures because it, it gives it more of a resonance in terms of, what that was like. So I talked about how all of these things have informed what I do. And basically every choice that I have made in my personal life and in my career have been because of the inspiration that I've gotten from what the Bus family did and what Nikki started. And these are, and so I became a social worker. I got a degree in psychology as an undergrad, and then I got my master's in social welfare at SUNY Albany. And I did work a number of different jobs, worked for most of my career as a school social worker in the Capital Region. And much of my job there was advocacy and helping kids and families get the services that they need and are needed. And that was a huge part of what I did. I always had a feeling for, helping somebody who didn't have what everybody else had, and learned how to do a lot of advocacy and how systems worked. And that job was really, really great for me. Then, about 20 years ago, I was able to find out about the Anti-Defamation League. How many of you are familiar with our organization? Okay, the Anti-Defamation League has been around for over 100 years, and we are one of the premier civil rights organizations in the world. We have over 30 offices in the United States and abroad. And in 1913, when this was started, it was started as a result of a lot of anti-Semitism in the United States at the time and a lot of Ku Klux Klan activity. And so the charter was to say we want to fight the defamation against the defamation of Jews, but also in the charter it says we want to fight for justice for all people. Now, over 100 years ago, this was unusual. Organizations might work for their own particular cause, but this ADL was really to work for advocacy for everybody, to fight prejudice and discrimination for all causes. And that has been our mission for over 100 years. And so I work with ADL. I do most of my work in schools with educators, and we do something called the World of Difference Institute. And we work directly with students. We go in and we teach students about how to deal with prejudice and bullying and all the kinds of things that are happening in the schools and in their communities. We also go onto college campuses. We do programs on campus. And as I said, we do faculty. And then a few years ago, I heard about the Holocaust education program that we do, which is called Echoes and Reflections. And this program is Holocaust education, but the purpose of the program is not just to teach the Holocaust. That's, of course, very vital and important. We want to learn about the Holocaust, but it's all about what does this mean for today? How can we relate the Holocaust and this genocide to other genocides and to other situations in our lives right now? And that's what the focus is about, and that's what we work on very much in doing that. And I do go around, mostly around New York State, and I train educators about how to teach the Holocaust in their schools. And so I feel like I'm impacting a lot of other students because these educators are working with students. And they're really focusing on, okay, what about today's election? How does that relate? Are there similarities between what's going on in today's election and the rise of Nazism and Hitler? Those are things that are so relevant, and people might think it happened so long ago, but it's really like yesterday that the Holocaust happened. So these are things that I do and work, and like I said, I'm really very much inspired by the buses and Nikki. So thank you. And I will.
So can you hear me? Okay, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about myself and my experience and the disability rights movement. So as the professor said, I was born with spina bifida, which is a neural tube defect. Anyone ever heard of it? Yes. Oh, good. For those who don't know, as a fetus develops, your spinal column actually is flat, and then around 8 weeks as gestation, the spinal column starts to form around the spinal cord. And for some reason, That doesn't happen in people with spina bifida. So depending upon where that occurs is dependent upon the severity of the disability. So the feeling right now, based on research, is that it's partly environmental and it's partly genetic. And there's a ton of young women in this audience, so I hope everybody's taking a multivitamin that includes folic acid every day, because half of pregnancies are unplanned, and folic acid is found to reduce the incidence of spina bifida by 70%. So it's a little plug for multivitamins. So people with spina bifida use the medical world quite frequently, depending upon the level of the lesion. It always involves neurological impairments and problems with bladder and bowels and learning. Most people with spina bifida or monotony have latex allergies, so there's like a whole bunch of things. So many young people, many babies, including myself, and young people spend most of their early years in and out of hospitals and having a lot of surgeries. But then after a while, it gets to be what it is, and then you just go forward in your life. So I now work at a community-based organization that's run by disabled people, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit before that. But early in my career, after I graduated college, I worked for a government agency that helped set up independent living centers, which is where I work now. So I was on the bureaucratic side of it for many years, helping to establish this network of centers all around the state. Then I left and went to work for the health department, and I spent almost all that time working in HIV/AIDS. So, and I started in 1990, and there's sort of a disconnect between HIV/AIDS and people who were middle-aged in 1990 and are now young people today. Now you think of AIDS as a chronic condition, manageable by medication. Oh my God, it's snowing like crazy. Wheelchairs and snow do not go together. Sorry. So in 1990, the time between diagnosis and death was 18 months. And we were building for HIV, and we were building programs as fast as we could in order to try and prolong life. By the time I left, 17 years later, it was a chronic disease in which medications were abundant, and at least in this state, and we were building programs to help people find jobs, find housing, find other services that they need, and so it was a whole different thing. But that 17 years really helped me get a sense of disabling conditions as a social issue, a social justice issue. I am one of those people that I don't know if it came late, but it didn't come right away to me. Having grown up with a disability, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. The perceptions of people with disabilities were still where they were 100 years before. The kinds of things you hear about, you think about in the 50s and 60s are people with disabilities who were handicapped, who were to be pitied, who were to be institutionalized, who were to be sterilized. And all of that went through the 50s and 60s. That wasn't like, centuries before. The Nazis perfected. I mean, we were one of the first sets of people to go. We were totally undesirable people in Nazi Germany, and we got gassed. They worked on how to gas people, practiced it on people with disabilities. We had no value in society whatsoever. And I was brought up in that sort of atmosphere, although I have to say I grew up with my parents who pushed me to do everything else my siblings did. So I got this sense that everything I was hearing in society wasn't exactly the way it was. But I didn't know other disabled people, and I went to school and came home, and I was the only person that I saw during the day who had a disability. And as I got older, I started to realize that maybe it really wasn't about me. Maybe it really was about society. As you probably know, 20% of the population of the United States is considered to have a disability. That makes it fairly common.
It makes it one of the larger minority populations that we have here. And so it wasn't, I finally realized maybe in high school or so that it really wasn't about my not being able to walk up that flight of stairs. It was, what the heck is that flight of stairs doing there when it doesn't have to?
Yes.
And it was an environmental issue, not a personal issue. Once you get there, you start realizing that there's lots of other people like you in the same position. So once I went to college and then I started working, I began to realize and recognize that there was a disability rights movement. The disability rights movement I could talk about for days, but I've only got 15 minutes altogether, so I'll just say that it's everything the civil rights movement is, and the women's movement, and the Black Lives Matter movement. It's about groups of people who are getting together and talking about injustice and doing things about it that doesn't have to do with individual people, but it has to do with a society, a system. In our case, it's both the systems and it's the physical environment that excludes us. So my professional, once I got there, my professional work has always been around. When I worked in HIV/AIDS, it was a time when hospitals didn't want to care for people with HIV/AIDS, where people would not come in and bring breakfast trays to people because they didn't want to catch it, where nobody would touch anybody with HIV/AIDS, and they wouldn't rent an apartment in an apartment building because other people in the apartment building might get infected. Now you say this kind of stuff and people think, isn't that silly? But it ruined people's lives. The people with HIV I met, when you would hug them, they would cry because people just didn't go near them. So this sense of injustice has sort of fueled my work, and I either personally experienced it or experienced it through the folks that I work with. So there is now, whereas pity, forced sterilization, institutionalization was what was around up until the 60s. Now it's about equal access. It's about finding jobs. It's about changing the physical environment to be accessible. It's about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is, our Civil Rights Act. But like the Civil Rights Act, law only takes you so far. Then there's people. And when people don't want laws, they go around them, ignore them, take you to court, whatever. So it's still very much evolving. One of the things that makes me the craziest is when I'll ask somebody, I will say to somebody, do you know if that building's accessible? And they will say, oh, sure, because that's the law. And then you go to the building and it's not even close. First of all, if for example, this building, this basement seems to be extremely accessible, but because this building is so old, there's no elevator, and you don't have to make this building accessible under the ADA because it would cost $1 zillion to put an elevator in. So if there is a financial hardship, you don't have to do it. So there are those kinds of balance. And then there are people who still say, well, I don't have to put a ramp on my restaurant because nobody with a wheelchair ever comes here. So those people still say so. And society still looks on people with disabilities, parts of society looks on people with disabilities as being, they don't see it as a social justice issue. They see people with disabilities as needing to be institutionalized or kept at home or not integrated, and that feeling is still very much alive and well, and certainly people with disabilities such as myself experience that quite a bit, pretty much on a daily basis. But when you realize that it requires education and social activism, it's a little better. So how do I keep doing this? One thing is I am surrounded by people with disabilities who are competent, who are focused, who are wonderful, who are working to make this world more equal for people with disabilities. And I love it. It just fuels my fire to be able to be around smart people with disabilities who feel the same way. I have to say that I was thinking about this when Evelyn was talking. The other way I think that fuels it is being friends with Evelyn and other people like Evelyn, for whom they work in all avenues of social justice. And when you talk to people, like if something really stupid happens, somebody says something really stupid to me, you talk to some people and they feel bad for you, right? That's not what Evelyn does. She talks about the social justice aspect of it and how wrong something is and why people should be fighting against this, and those are the kinds of things that keep you going, you know, because this kind of stuff can be kind of discouraging after a while. So you have to find people who think like you think and who want to be in the good fight with you, and that really helps too. Okay, that's fine.
Let's take some questions. Yeah, thank you.
This is for you, Barbara. So, I've traveled somewhat, and the way that people refer to people with disabilities tends to change. So, I've never been quite sure what the correct terminology is or how one should speak about people who have disabilities.
It has changed significantly over time, but I have to also say it depends on the person, which makes it more complicated for folks like you that ask that question.
Okay.
Words like handicapped, crippled, bad, never use it. Can
I just say that goes for any kind of difference. Always ask.
Yeah, that's the bottom line is yes. So I use people with disabilities. In the disability rights movement, we talk about our being people first and having a disability second. So I really always use people with disabilities. But I have to say, there are some people in the far left disability community who are like, hell no, that's who I am. And I want disabled first, because that is a major part of my personality, my being, is being disabled. I don't want it shoved down to be later. I want it to be right up there, right front. I am disabled, deal with it. So some people call themselves disabled, like a disabled woman. And then we have our own language too, the language of people who share commonality. So for example, some of my friends call, like if they just did a really, they play basketball or something, they call themselves super crips. But those are sort of like the insider's language that nobody that doesn't have a disability is supposed to do. But Ev is right. What I always tell people is just ask them how they want to be referred, or notice how they refer them to themselves, and then copy that.
Can you please talk a little bit more about the work you're doing right now with other, we're talking about how like the Holocaust, or like genocide and how that connects to genocide today.
Okay. So we have a program that's called Echoes and Reflections, and this was it's a partnership between the Anti-Defamation League, the Shoah Foundation. Anyone here heard of the Shoah Foundation? That is, have you seen Schindler's List? Movie? Okay. So Steven Spielberg, the director, realized in 1993 when he made this film that there were many survivors that had not been interviewed. So he developed the Shoah Foundation, and he actually interviewed thousands and thousands of survivors, including my parents. And when he got all the interviews together, and this was done all over the country, he said, what do I do with this now? And then they developed the Shoah Foundation, and now it's part of the University of Southern California. So all these interviews are accessible, and there's something called Eyewitness, and that's the Shoah Foundation. And then there's also Yad Vashem, and that's the Holocaust Organization and Research Foundation in Israel. So they all got together and developed this program. And the huge focus, of course, is to teach the Holocaust, but every single lesson that we do is focused on what does this mean for us today. We take people through the experiential activities, and we teach the educators how to do it, and then they work with the students on specific activities. For example, let's give you a list of rights. What are my rights? Okay, my right to vote, my right to go to the supermarket, my right to practice my religion, my right to play on a sports team, you know, as a female, as a male, whatever, as a, you know, whatever situation you have. And then we have people rank them, and they talk about what that means. And so, what are these? How do these ranking these rights? What do they have to do with my freedom and who I want to be, and what kind of society do I want to live in, and how can I exercise those rights so that I can live in a society that does allow these rights to happen? And then, how does this reflect what's going on in the world? What's happening in our country? What's happening in other countries? What's making these other genocides happen in other places? What is it about these lack of rights? And I'm just using rights as one example, because there's obviously many other factors. But that's how we do it, and we teach people how to think about their world critically and how to get more civically engaged. So that's what the basic program is about. And so we're using the teaching history to say, well, how is this relevant for now today?
Just a follow-up question. Do you do this already, or do you hope to build bridges between like the refugee crisis right now, especially like Muslim children, Muslim peoples, and how that connects to what happened?
Yeah.
Or is it mostly?
Yes. Well, we have ADL does three things. We protect rights. We let we have attorneys, and we're an international organization where we do speak out against injustice, and we investigate hate crimes, and then we do the education piece. And all three of those do look at ways to build bridges and have meetings and that kind of thing. For example, we're sponsoring a conference coming up in November in New York City on current anti-Semitism. But we have lots of other, if you check out our website, it's adl.org. And we do try to build bridges and try to develop other situations where people are communicating with each other, and we're also, involved in teaching lessons about Black Lives Matter, what that's about. We deal with all kinds of issues around that.
So what's your sense, Evelyn, of how many of our, let's say, K through 12 students have exposure to some sort of training like this? What percentage of them?
I don't know the percentage. I would say that it's probably not a huge percentage, because we have to go into each school and do this work. But we are wherever we have an office, we are pretty prevalent there. So we have offices in many of the large cities around the country. For example, we have one in the Capital District, and I've personally gone to schools all over this area. So we do train a lot of students, but I'd have to look up what the actual percentage is. I don't really know. There also depends on we have the Safe Schools Act here in New York State, so it depends on the state as well. Safe schools are really looking at ways to help students feel safe within the school environment, and there are many different ways that schools do that. But we also really try to advocate and market our programs so that they can learn specific skills about how to deal with those things in the schools.
So I know when you, Evelyn, and Barbara were talking about your stories, you both mentioned your upbringing with your parents and how influential they were to your lives. And the outreach that you do seems to be targeted to teachers that will then bring those lessons onto the students. Is there any kind of outreach that you do to the parents of these students who have a much larger influence on the students' lives?
I'll answer first. We also have parent education programs as well. The particular program that I work for is called the Classroom of Difference. My focus is in schools, but we also have Workplace of Difference, and we have Campus of Difference. So we do go into other arenas, and we do work with other people that way. But we do programs for parents of students as well.
We actually have a lot of work we do with parents. We find, even given the Americans with Disabilities Act and increased accessibility and increased awareness, in our organization, we have a lot of young people that come to us who we feel like have been living in a bubble, and are really not equipped to live in the world as it is now. And parents, I don't know if any folks here are parents, but I'm one, so I'm not. I just know that try and protect your children, and it's really hard to come to the point where maybe overprotection isn't the best thing. If you have a child with a disability, if you have a child without a disability, a lot of times they tell you when to leave you alone, when to be left alone. Children with disabilities, they're going to medical appointments, there's benefits, there's complications, and so they have a little bit more involvement with parents. And we have got a lot of young people who come to us who are in their 20s who are still living at home, not working. The school dropped them when they graduated or left school, whatever it is. And so just from the minute parents come in, we can see it. We're an organization run by people with disabilities, with a couple three, four wheelchair users, three people are blind, a couple people have mental health challenges, deaf persons. We're the cross disability. And adults come in looking for the people who work there because they assume we're all consumers who are getting services. And there's almost an uneasiness. We're in charge. We're the ones in charge. And that's the model that we want to show people. We practice what we preach. But we have we go to schools. We do a lot of programming with young people, and then separately with their parents to kind of get the word out. Parents and the way people are brought up is really very, very important in the disability world. As there are more and more people with disabilities who previous generations would have died, there's a lot more work for us to do, and parents are really very key to that. Hi.
Like working in social justice, kind of like what are some of the challenges you face or like frustrations you face, like in that line of work? And then like how do you like deal with that?
Okay. Let me something specifically disability that's specific to disability. Well, it is actually, is that it is very hard to get a lot of people with disabilities together because the world is still inaccessible. There's a huge unemployment rate for people with disabilities. They don't have the money to get on a bus and go to Washington, D.C. They physically can't get on a bus and go to Washington, D.C. I would like to say that our community, as I explained, is similar to civil rights issues and feminist issues, but we are actually quite far behind in the civil rights arena. We have we don't have as many coalesced groups. We have like this one and that one and that one and that one. So it's hard to get people together. The disability community is very varied, and so the commonalities are not. People don't necessarily see the commonalities. I mean, I see the commonalities, but a deaf person might think that someone with a developmental disability and them have nothing in common, whereas I think they do. I think there's continues to be an incredible amount of lack of education of this issue as a social justice issue. I think people are very familiar with disability issues, but more in the service arena. Still view many people as needing somehow assistance. That the answer to lack of affordable housing is building institutions instead of building integrated accessible housing that's affordable. So I think we have a tremendous amount, and I find that ignorance daily in my life. I really do. And so there's a tremendous amount of work. So it's very frustrating. It's extremely frustrating, but it really is very necessary. And I passionately believe in what I'm doing. I've never not believed in what I'm doing. And I surround myself with people who believe like I believe.
And I would, agree with Barbara that, it's difficult. Any kind of system change is really, really hard. There's so many hard things about it. One thing is that it's really important to feel, passionate about what you do and feel very strongly about what you do, because changing people's minds is one of the most difficult things out there. We always say at ADL, prejudice is learned and therefore can be unlearned, but to unlearn it is not easy. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. You also have to be very, very comfortable with your passion, but also with your own emotions. Because if I'm facilitating a workshop and, something happened yesterday at a workshop, a person said to me, and I guess I'll share it with you, and I had to be very cool and calm about it. Basically, she said, this is an educator in New York State, said, well, I'm from the South, and my grandparents or great-grandparents owned slaves, but they were good slave owners. It sounds funny now, but she believed that, So you have to be really in control of your emotions. You have to really decide, that's what a facilitator does. And I think that's what, a lot of you are interested in doing in terms of social justice. The hardest thing is being a good facilitator because you have your own, feelings, right? And you want to make them, you want to hit them over the head, but you can't. And I tell my students, the high school students, because we have this peer training program, and they're like, well, why can't they think this way? Or why can't, and I say, being a facilitator is a lifelong process. I'm still learning about it, and we're not going to say how old we are, but we're so it's a lifelong process. I'm still it's gonna be something I'm always going to be working on for myself because it's not easy, and changing their minds and getting them to and changing the system, it's hard work. Not to mention the fact that when that's unpopular, saying, talking about being a bystander. Most of the issues that we have in prejudice are about the bystanders. I mean, you can't always deal with the perpetrator or the aggressor because they're just going to be who they are. All right, you might, but the bystanders are the people that you can really have an impact on. But if you stand up, it's so much easy just to be another bystander and just to watch, and in your job, in your life, in your family. If Uncle so and so says something prejudicial, it's so much easier at Thanksgiving dinner not to respond and not to, say something to him. But the hard work is being the person that says something, the person that does actively things. So those are the tricky parts.
Yeah, I was thinking, I've had many people over the years, think that they were paying me the ultimate compliment, which is, oh, I don't think of you as disabled. So in other words, I'm like a regular person, I guess, and they think that is like the greatest compliment they could ever give me. But what does that say about what they view people with disabilities as? What? Helpless? To be pitied? To be, locked away? To be, whatever. I don't follow that, their prejudices. So therefore, I'm one of the good guys. Just like if someone said to you in a corporate situation, I never think of you as a woman. I mean, isn't that stupid? Really? Isn't that stupid? But people say, I never think of you as disabled. It's like they're blessing me that I'm like one of the real people now or something. And I have to say, it takes a lot of inner sort of hold back to be able to not want to punch them. I do want to punch them, but I just think, well, that's because I am a person with a disability. It's a piece of me, as the rest of me is, and I'm the whole package.
Do you encounter the snaps when you go to schools?
Yes. It's cool.
Question? Anything else?
If no one else wants to ask, but I wanted to know, Barbara, if you would say something about, I know this is the case already, but also I heard on NPR last night that there are significant problems anticipated for voters with disabilities coming up in the upcoming election. I wondered if you would have anything to say about that, maybe in your work that you've encountered.
This election, I didn't say it actually, I'm not working. This election is the most scary thing I've ever experienced in my life. I cannot believe it. So my organization, along with lots of other independent living centers all around the country, have been working on voter access for decades. It is still a really big problem. You know, in some communities, it's really been dealt with well. In other communities, it hasn't. We, independent living centers have been doing access surveys for a year since, a year ago, to try to let people know how they can vote, where they can vote. I think this is a really good election to really understand how bad absentee ballots are. Because I don't want to, I love voting for it, but for the people that are undecided, it's a happening thing every day, right? You don't want to miss, if you vote absentee ballot and you voted already, who knows what's been going on, what's going to be going on the next couple of weeks. So being able to vote on the same day as everybody else is really critical. And we only advocate absentee ballots if there's absolutely no other way. We have sued, in fact, I work in Rensselaer County, and we have sued the Board of Elections because voting sites were not accessible. There are lots of independent living centers around the country who are doing exactly the same thing. It's definitely better than it was 20 years ago, but it is absolutely not fixed. And we're educating people about their particular voting site so they can figure out the accessibility of it and then use absentee ballots as little as possible. It's a real problem. It's a terrible problem. And if ever there was a reason to vote, it's not, this year is it. It's just been terrible. I mean, the one thing I have to say, making fun of the reporter with disabilities, there was such moral outrage. It was great to see. Now, I mean, him, I expect anything out of. But there was such moral outrage about it that it was nice to see that people understood that that wasn't acceptable.
And the women's issues. That's just. I mean, that seems like it might have been the turning point. It's just amazing to come out.
Evelyn, just one last question, I guess. Can you say a little bit about social work as a field, and how it works and how it aligns with social justice?
Yes. Okay. So I feel very lucky because I got my master's in social work in the 1970s. And still making a living with that degree. 1970s till now. State school, not to knock the private school at all, but the state school. And it really, what I got out of social work was the understanding of systems. Now, I was a psychology major undergrad and went into social work because my roommate was doing it. I didn't know a whole lot about it. And I have to say, I was very, very thrilled to be in a profession where we understood the systems, how things work. And social work is all about that. What are the systems? How can we change these systems to make them better? And we've had a very long history, 150 years of people who have tried to do this and do this work. And much of any job, you can do so many things in social work. You can choose any number of fields that whether you work in the macro or the whatever system, the direct service, whatever. I chose to do direct service initially, but I'm also a clinical supervisor. And there's so much that you can do in terms of social justice, even just in the schools. When I was a school social work, it was a systemic problem. Whenever I'd work with a special needs child, it was a systemic problem, not just it was. We would look at it from a systems point of view. How can we make the whole family system better? How can we make their environment better? What can we do as opposed to just, you're coming in to me for counseling, we're just going to talk for a little while. No, it was about that whole system, and that's really what I think social work offers. So it's a real definite plug for social welfare and Activism. I think it's wonderful. Unfortunately, we haven't had such a great prestige in the world. People don't, see psychology as better in some ways, and whatever, in terms of just the way people are looking at it. But I think that it's come a long way, and that I'm really very proud of it. And I think it's it's a wonderful field to go into if you're looking for something to do with social justice.
Barbara, do you want to say something about the nonprofit world in terms of social justice?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, I was thinking about this. We get students from the university, MSW students. But the students who come to our program for their internships are really interested in the social justice aspect of social work. We've still met some people for whom they want, and this is not social work, this is nonprofits in general. Disability nonprofits want to make the disability the problem. What we do in independent living centers is we see the problem not with the person, but with the environment or the system. And so you have a lot of people who go through traditional disability rehab type organizations who are trying to, who the professional staff is trying to fix their broken pieces. So that's not what we're about. We're about people with disabilities who share their experiences with other people with disabilities who can understand what it's like to be shoved aside, discriminated against in job interviews, not having the opportunity to go live someplace because it's not accessible. I mean, we all get that where I work. And so we're talking about fixing the environment. And what we do with people, not that we don't deal with people also, is we try and give people some skills for advocacy, being their own advocates, and navigation skills so they can navigate themselves or with assistance some of these systems that are so detrimental to them, and to give them an understanding that they have a voice in their own lives.
Thank you so much for coming.